Good evening, everybody watching. I'm Hector Roos, Director at Large 2 for the Libertarian Party of Florida. I'm joined here with Greg Peele. He's the chair of the Libertarian Party of Florida Rules Committee, and we are doing a preview of the agenda for the upcoming Libertarian Party of Florida State Convention, April 22nd through the 23rd. There is a social gathering on April 21st. For more information, you can check out the full information package there on lpfcon.org. That is LPF as in convention.org. Greg, we're already looking at the agenda here for the annual business meeting. Let's just dive right in.
Yeah, we've got a lot to go through, so might as well make the most of it. So this is a two-day convention agenda, as you mentioned. It is the official annual business meeting for the party as required both by state law and by our own governing documents. Day one morning session called to order at 9:30 a.m. That's when it officially starts. Hopefully on time. Libertarians are not always the best at that. But item number one is introduction to call to order. That's our chair, Stephen Nikela, getting the meeting started. Nothing really to go and do there. Item two is the convention credentials report from the Secretary, Ed Appler. Just as a note, anyone can register as a delegate up until the basically that point, as long as they meet the 60-day registration requirement as an LPF voter and member. Now, I know that there's been a number of times where people have shown up as an LPF voter, but didn't realize they didn't qualify because they weren't an LPF member. I assume that will continue this year. That's something that we probably want to consider how to streamline in the future, but that is the current bylaws. Once a delegate is credentialed, at any point during this convention, they count towards quorum and they can't sign back out for that. So that is something to be aware of, that if people start leaving, it becomes harder and harder to keep quorum. And that's part of how parliamentary procedure goes, right? There are even people that do different types of parliamentary tactics around that. Anyway.
Right. And last year, we actually had about 101 convention delegates. I think it increased like 103 or 104. By the afternoon, and so that meant that our quorum requirement is about 50% plus one.
Yes, and so as more people sign in, then the quorum requirements can go up, but they can never go back down. And that was actually a matter of a bylaws issue, or not bylaws, but a matter of parliamentary inquiry in a previous year. But we don't need to go into that. We got our own parliamentary fund this year. So once we've credentialed the delegates, basically Ed Appler presents the report, and then that's the point where if anybody disputes the credentialed delegates, either to say someone should not be credentialed or someone who's missed who should be on there, it can be amended at that time. Then once we've accepted the credentials report, then it's a quorum call, of course, just to verify that we do have quorum. Appointment of a sergeant at arms and a parliamentarian. Those are usually pro forma. Technically, this is a vote of the delegates, majority vote. I believe Karen Ann Harlos is serving as our parliamentarian again this year. Is that correct?
Yes.
That is great news. She definitely knows what she's doing. And I'm also a big fan of her particular vigorous defense of member rights. So she's definitely been there for us before, and I don't think she's going to steer us wrong.
I think this is the third year in a row, actually.
Yeah. Item 6, in memoriam, just a remembrance of libertarians who have passed on since our last business meeting. Item 7, and this is where the fun begins, approval of agenda. So I guess it's worth noting that the draft agenda posted on the website, as well as this draft agenda, and if they're different, these are just suggestions from the executive committee. The delegates have the final say on the agenda and can move at this point to either adopt it as presented or amend it in any way whatsoever, so long as it's consistent with the bylaws and everything that's required by the bylaws is in there. So in particular, to a point you brought up earlier, there are several floor motions that affect what positions are up for election and the eligibility for voting and things like that. I imagine the movers of those motions will probably want to try to amend the agenda to move their motions before the things they affect. That is one way of doing that, and we can discuss that more individually on each floor motion as to the impact of doing that versus not doing that. I would say that should the delegates choose not to amend the agenda in that way, that the mover of motions affecting the executive committee should probably be prepared to amend their motions to take effect in 2024 or otherwise deal with that being done out of order. That's just a suggestion. At the end of the day, the delegates have a final say. So anything you want to bring up about the agenda before, other than that, I think that just the floor motions affecting elections are the only piece that might be controversial.
Yeah, the part of the point of why we're even doing this is because we have an extended amount of work in regards to changes and updates to the rules, our bylaws and constitution that were not taken up last year. And that's kind of why I was looking at old business there as the next section. So because we technically never arrived to them, but they're being reintroduced as part of your rules report instead of old business.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, technically they are old business, but because of the structure of the rules report being its own separate thing, we're handling them under items 12, 13, and 14. So yeah, the context there is there were quite a few rules motions made by the previous rules committee in 2022, but due to a bit of a snafu, the constitution and bylaws available to the delegates did not actually reflect the most up-to-date versions of those documents, incorporating the amendments made in 2021 and in one case in 2020. So the delegates, after being made aware of that fact, very wisely chose not to amend documents when they didn't know what effect their amendments would have, and recommitted all of those motions back to rules so that we could make sure, okay, yes, we know what the current state of the Constitution and bylaws are supposed to be, which we did that. We went through, and for anyone familiar with software development, it was basically merging two Git branches who had diverged and reconciling the conflicts. Thankfully, it wasn't anywhere near as involved as we feared it would be, and the conflicts were more tedious than difficult. The primary place where it was a problem was in LPF Constitution Article 3, where it affected the order and placement of a number of items related to deputy secretary, deputy treasurer, and alternates, which actually had a slightly interesting implication on item 9 we'll get to as well. In any case, we completed that reconciliation. We have the correct up-to-date versions of the documents posted now, and therefore we're reintroducing all but 3 of the motions moved by my predecessor. And of the 3 motions that we are not reintroducing, one we don't need to because we did in fact pass it last year at the advice of the parliamentarian. That was the one involving LNC delegate selection. And then the other 2, we are presenting substitute motions to solve the same problem a different way. So technically old business, but it's going to be covered in the Constitution and bylaws rules reports.
Otherwise, I don't think we have old business to consider then.
Yeah, to my knowledge, there is none unless the delegates think of something that we missed. Item 9, first call for open nominations for executive committee positions. So we do 2 calls for nominations just so that people have a chance to be nominated. And particularly if they happen to miss one, they can still be present for the other so that they can accept it. You do have to either be physically present to accept your nomination or have indicated in writing in advance that you accepted the nomination. In the latter case, you can be nominated in absentia if you can't actually make the annual business meeting. But it definitely has to be in writing to the secretary in that case. Positions up for nomination in this manner are chair and vice chair, which are regularly elected on odd number years. Treasurer, due to a special circumstance. So our current treasurer, Mr. Perez, had submitted his resignation to be effective at the convention. Mr. Leisner is our deputy treasurer, but due to that reconciliation issue that I mentioned with the Constitution, the clauses on deputy treasurer actually didn't make it into the final document. There is a motion from my predecessor to correct that we'll be hearing during the rules report. However, in either case, Mr. Leisner would become the acting treasurer until the treasurer is elected. And there's a different clause in the LPF Constitution, Article 3, that says for any position on the executive committee, if the person currently serving in the position was not elected to that position regularly, then that position is up for election regardless. So even though Mr. Leisner would first be acting treasurer, and then if the rules report is adopted, become the deputy or become the treasurer, it would still be up for election anyway under that clause. The intent of that being at the time, I think I may have even written the motion that did that, was that when we exit the annual business meeting, everyone serving on the executive committee had been elected by the delegates at some point. Does that make sense?
It sure does to me. Basically, you want the actual body of the membership to elect your officers, and
Yeah.
the chair and vice chair are both 1-year terms.
2-year terms.
The chair and treasurer, vice chair. So all these are actually
Yeah,
2-year
all
terms.
5 of them are 2-year terms, except for the treasurer will be to serve the remainder of the unexpired term. So the treasurer will be 1 year.
I'm a director at large too. I'm serving in the gap, so my election's not until next convention.
Yes,
Same
sir.
with treasurer.
Yeah. So treasurer and secretary regular election will be in 24, as will director at large 2, whereas this year director at large 1 and 3 will be up for election. And those are 2-year terms as well. And so all of the elections and nominations work functionally the same way for these at-large positions. The only positions that are handled differently are the regional representatives, which we'll discuss later. This is just first call for nominations. This is where people submit nominations, either nominate themselves or nominate someone else, and then confirm that the person does in fact accept the nomination. Item 10 is officer reports. I get nothing fancy there. The officers give their reports. Mr. Perez, the outgoing treasurer, will give his report. Then secretary, vice chair, and chair. As a courtesy, we also have a report from the LNC, from our LNC regional representatives, which would be either David Benner or Martin Cohen or both. And then the fun begins. Rules report, Constitution. Oh, I'm on deck. So historically, the way we did this is the Rules Committee gave the rules report, which is more of a set of motions from the Rules Committee than it is an actual report. Although I do include a section in my rules report documenting what our committee did. But in the interest of time, we won't be belaboring it. People can just read it if they want. We do have a number of motions on deck regarding the Constitution and the bylaws from the Rules Committee. We do not have any motions on the standing rules, so that report will be very brief.
Now, you can go ahead and go to the Constitution just so we'll see it as we go.
Yes.
But the point of us talking about it now is to make sure that no one's surprised that we're seeing all of these motions and really be confused about the purpose of them as well. This is basically 2 years of work stuffed into one report. Although they're somewhat substantial, but they're not overly complicated either, and we'll go over them now.
Yep. So I pulled up the 2023 Rules Committee report as I wrote it, and was approved by the Rules Committee. Like I said, we'll skip the fluff section on that. I have each of the amendment proposals formatted markup, so you can see what's added, what's removed, what's moved, that sort of thing. Actually reading those out on the floor is always a little bit exciting, but well, I'll make it work. Or whoever presents them on my behalf if I'm not present, because there's unfortunately a small but non-zero chance I won't be able to make the ABM. But I'm sure worst case scenario, either Vice Chair Requero of the Rules Committee or Vice Chair Hofka of the Executive Committee will be able to cover for me. So I guess let's dive right in. So the rules motions all have a numbering scheme. This is a numbering scheme that's been going on for many years now, and I saw no reason to discontinue it. As the year, so in this case, we have 2022. This is a motion from last year that we are revisiting. ABM, it's at the convention. C, it applies to the Constitution. And then the number 01, it's the first motion for the Constitution in 2022. So for sort of background here, the LPF is governed by 4 governing documents. The Constitution is our highest document, subordinate only to state law, despite our objection to that. The second tier is the bylaws, which can specify anything that is not prohibited by the Constitution. The third tier is Robert's Rules of Order, which is adopted as our parliamentary authority. And then the fourth tier is the standing rules, which are the policies and guidelines set by the Executive Committee. So the Rules Committee is tasked each year with reviewing all of these documents. Obviously, we don't amend Roberts, but we review the other 3 for potential to improve them, clarify them, repeal things that are no longer needed, or to fix issues that are barriers preventing the party from being successful. I will say one thing I'm very pleased with is that while our governing documents certainly have a lot of ways that we can improve them, for the most part, I don't think there's anything in there that is a impassable barrier to the party to getting its business done. That there are ways we can streamline it, but there's nothing that, in my opinion, is an absolute must pass or else the party will fail. Now, there are certainly things that are more helpful than others as to making certain operations of the party easier. So with that background stage set, let's dive right into 2022 ABM CO1, a motion to amend the LPF Constitution, Article 2, Section 111 to clarify membership rules. This was moved by my predecessor, Mr. Tony Sellers, last year, recommitted to rules, and then we reviewed it, and we're going to be introducing it again this year. So this motion amends Article 2, clarifies that for LPF voters, it means LPF registered voters. You can't claim you're a voter without voter registration. And that if you become ineligible to be an LTF member, it terminates any request you've made in that regard, even if it hasn't yet been processed. That just as a kind of a formality, because there's a lag between a person filing their membership on the website and us actually entering it into our records. While that is a shall issue kind of thing, this does mean that if you were eligible when you filed, but then become ineligible, that you at that point your request is terminated and you don't go in the records. That also removes the need for the clause about reaffirmation to reinstate, since that's kind of automatic. If you're terminated, you're terminated and have to apply to reinstate. So we reviewed it. We determined that the merges and reconciliation we did not affect this method, and there was no real reason not to present Mr. Sellers' motion again. This is more housekeeping. I don't think it really substantively changes anything. Mr. Roos, do you have any questions on this one?
No, this is pretty straightforward.
So yeah, this one should be straightforward. I don't expect it to be controversial. Although the delegates can always surprise me, since the convention does reflect the will of the delegates, not necessarily the people moving the motions. 2022 ABM CO2, same kind of deal. Mr. Sellers had moved it last year, recommitted. We revisited it. This just fixes the clause on the public notice requirement for business meetings of the executive committee. The current constitution says that the notice must be sent to all county chairs. I am not sure this has ever actually been done. But now the proposed wording is what's actually required by statute, which is published on our public and functioning website, which is what we've actually been doing anyway to comply with statute. So pretty straightforward. Any questions on this one, Mr. Roos?
Yes, a lot of these are basically having to, the party's organized under Florida law, so we're just following the dictums of those laws, and we don't. Those are minimum requirements that we have to follow through with.
Yeah, and in most cases, it's just relatively pro forma stuff. Like, I like to stick it to the man as much as anyone else, but there's a time and place to pick your battles for sure. And public notice of business meetings is something I believe in for its own sake, even if the law didn't mandate it. So. Moving along to 2022 ABM CO3. So this is the first one we actually did something a little bit more with. This was still moved last year. We revisited it and we made some slight tweaks to it. So what this was doing, the original version did two things. The first thing it did is in the Constitution, Article 3, Section 4, the Constitution prescribed that the executive committee create a committee to maintain a current contact list of experts in fields related to election issues. This was never, to my knowledge, actually done. And at a procedural level, the Constitution isn't where we prescribe committees anyway. So this particular clause was struck because it was both in the wrong spot and not, if the executive committee had not done this in however many years this clause had been in here and the delegates did not insist on it, clearly it was not something that was important enough to have in the Constitution, right? Second one, executive committee shall establish a legislative review committee. That's actually already in the bylaws where the committees are actually prescribed. Having it in the Constitution is both unnecessary and redundant. Item C, LPF committees may use an online platform as a forum for its meetings. Per Roberts and per the LPF standing rules and everything else, the committees can already meet however they want. We don't need to prescribe that. So this is basically just striking language from the Constitution that is both over-specific and unnecessary. The original version moved A and C to the bylaws, but we decided not to include that in the proposal since we also saw that as unnecessary. But we do agree with the original strikes. Any questions on that one?
Yeah, one thing to point out is that there are a lot of redundancies that we're just eliminating to make it more streamlined. You know, like you said. In fact, I want to commend the Rules Committee itself. Did a lot of effort to review again the work that was done the previous year, make sure that it just makes sense. And this has been reviewed so thoroughly that really there isn't anything that should be a surprise or even controversial to that matter. But we're going over it again so people have an opportunity to hear it from the chair of the Rules Committee himself.
Yeah. And of course, the recommitted motions from last year reflected the work that Mr. Tony Sellers, Mr. Philippe Cataret, and Mr. Chris Rose performed. And those three certainly know what they're doing when it comes to rules and parliamentary procedure as well. So I wasn't expecting to find anything problematic going into it. Anyway, so moving on to 2022 ABM CO4, Deputy Elections and Duties. I mentioned this earlier with regards to the treasurer election. So this basically cleans up the wording on how the deputy treasurer works to make it parallel to the deputy secretary. So it strikes some existing language on the deputy secretary, creates a new subsection for deputy secretary election, and cleans up the wording on it a little bit, just wordsmithing, and clarifies that if the deputy secretary, if the secretary becomes vacant, the deputy secretary immediately assumes the office is not subject to a vote. Then subsection D, the new text, is the same thing for the deputy treasurer. It also clarifies that the deputy treasurer should not serve concurrently on the audit committee because there's certain restrictions involving that committee. I'm not entirely sure that should be in the Constitution, but I kept the language from the previous Rules Committee regardless. And also clarifies the deputy treasurer can only be a proxy for the treasurer and not anyone else. So Mr. Sellers was thinking through some corner cases there. Further down in the duties of the secretary and treasurer, there's again just some wordsmithing. There's nothing really substantively different. It's just improving the quality of the wording and fixes some spelling and grammar issues. So we reviewed this and saw no reason not to adopt it as the previous Rules Committee submitted. And this would also, assuming this motion passes as written, that would also mean that the deputy treasurer or the deputy treasurer would immediately become the treasurer because of the resignation of the current treasurer, at least until that position is elected. So any questions on this one?
No, again, it seems pretty straightforward. Florida state law allows for deputy treasurers. In fact, it recommends it, especially in large organizations. And in case of the inability of the main treasurer to file reports, then the deputy is already allowed to do so with their own authority.
Yeah. And of course, given the penalties for missing a report or filing it late, that is very prudent for the party to have that resource. 2022 ABM CO7. This is probably the easiest and least controversial of the motions. In Constitution Article 8, there was a stray word among in between published and on. It's believed that this was just a mistake in transcription from a previous motion. Nonetheless, it is what is in the Constitution. The previous Rules Committee recommended striking the word among. We confirmed it's still there and still needs to be struck. So, amendments among us. All right. Moving on to, you see the 2023 ABM CO3. This is one of the new ones that the current Rules Committee wrote. Motion. Yeah. So clarify member rights and affiliates. So this is actually dealing with some issues that came up with the application of the Member Bill of Rights, which was a set of motions passed in 2020, basically guaranteeing what are the individual member rights of LPF members with regards to county affiliates. And the basic framework of the Member Bill of Rights, I'm actually very much a fan of it. It creates a good balance between preserving the rights of individual members of the party with the autonomy of the county affiliates. However, it didn't envision all of the creative structures that our county affiliates might take. And we dealt with a number of inquiries on the Rules Committee from various county affiliates on how the Constitution applied to their exact situation. So this particular amendment is our attempt to clarify what we believe the language already says, but rewrite it in a way where it's clearer to the intent to affiliates reading it. Because to get to some of these things, we had to interpret the current language in light of Robert's rules and parliamentary tradition. And where possible, particularly when we're dealing with affiliates, I'd rather it just be plainly spelled out so that people don't have to cross-reference. So the substantive changes here is clarifying members of the LPF are entitled to attend the annual business meeting of any affiliate in whose jurisdiction they reside. If, for example, an affiliate has multi-county jurisdiction, then that would cover that case. If we ever create affiliates that are smaller than a county, such as a city affiliate or a university affiliate, it would still apply to that. They can attend the annual business meeting of any affiliate whose jurisdiction they reside, vote in all regular and special elections at any affiliate meeting for all elected positions. So the intent here being that while the executive committees of the affiliates conduct the day-to-day business of the affiliates, that the elections to the executive committee and the amendments to the governing documents of the affiliate are something that every LPF member should have the right to vote on. And of course, noting that we define LPF member as LPF registered voter plus having signed the NAT pledge on the website. So this clarifies that previously it didn't specify which elections that you could vote on. It just implied it was all of them. We clear up the language to say, no, it is in fact all elections, regular and special, for all elected positions in whose jurisdiction they reside. So that actually comes with two caveats there too. The first thing is there are some affiliates that have district-based representatives on their executive committee, typically called precinct committeemen and committeewomen. So this update is to clarify that the members only have to right to vote for their own precinct committeemen and committeewomen, not every precinct, unless the affiliate grants them that right separately. The affiliate can, of course, grant more rights than the minimum prescribed by the LPF. The second is for all at-large positions, whether it's directors at-large representatives, or officers, everyone in the affiliate gets to vote on those. And that was a matter of some debate in a particular affiliate where the officers were not traditionally elected at large by the full membership. That was clearly the intent of the motion. And I personally think it's a good idea regardless. The last piece was the adoption and amendment of any governing documents, including constitution and bylaws. This covers the case where some affiliates, including my own, allow you to amend the governing documents at any meeting, not just the annual business meeting. And some affiliates have more governing documents than just the Constitution and bylaws. In all cases, the members are allowed to vote on amendments to the governing documents. So this is our attempt at clarifying what we believe the existing language intended, but explicitly spelling out so there's no ambiguity. Mr. Roos, any discussion points you want to get into on this one?
I'll reiterate that this is a careful review of the existing rules to protect members' rights. So if this has occurred because there was an issue in the past where people were actually disenfranchised of their votes, but they stuck it out, and honestly they're running their affiliate now anyway. So I'm really appreciative that the Rules Committee took the time to amend these rules to make sure that we have a uniform approach for member rights across the entire state. Member rights are the same in any county or local or even smaller or bigger jurisdictional affiliate as possible.
Yeah, and that's definitely a priority the current Rules Committee shared with probably the 4 preceding Rules Committees, is that the rights of our individual members were our utmost importance. Then next to that, the autonomy and self-determination of our affiliates.
Right.
And then after that, the policies and procedures of the executive committee. I think that's a good order to tackle those things.
Right. Just to reiterate, the members themselves are the party, not the officers, not the structure, not the constitution or bylaws, because they can be set aside by the members themselves in order to right the ship of the organization.
All right. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because the next motions were bylaws, and with the agenda, we'll be doing the bylaws in a separate section. So CO1, affiliate rights, 2023 ABM, CO1, affiliate rights and responsibilities. So this is one of the 2 motions I mentioned before.
Before we get into that, we're going in order. Before we were going in a different order. So when we see them on the agenda, the formal agenda in the rules report, we'll see them in the proper 01, 02, 03.
I had actually moved them in a particular order in the report, but yes, I think just for simplicity, we'll do them in the numbered order. They're all written so that it shouldn't matter. There are a couple motions that are contingent on each other, but we can deal with that when we get there.
However you like.
So 2023 ABM CO1, Affiliate Rights and Responsibilities. So the previous Rules Committee attempted to tackle a subject that is not currently well handled in our bylaws, which is what are the responsibilities of a county affiliate and what happens if they're disaffiliated, which, I mean, you hope you don't have to do, but you have to have a policy in place for what happens when you do. We took a look at what the previous Rules Committee did, but we decided to take our own stab at it since we disagreed on a few areas of it, and we thought we could handle it more comprehensively in the Constitution rather than in the bylaws. Since the affiliate rights and affiliate autonomy is our second pillar after individual member rights, we felt that that deserved equal protection in the Constitution. So with this motion, we are rewriting the entirety of the LPF Constitution, Article 4, which is the section on affiliates. Currently, that only has one section. We're rewriting that section, and then we're adding a number of other sections, hopefully in a somewhat logical order. So the first section is basically, how does an affiliate come to be? Any organization of LPF voters in a Florida county with no current LPF affiliated county, political party executive committee. That language is important. That's the language in Florida statute. Henceforth, county affiliate. So when we use the term county affiliate, we know it refers to that. May petition to become a county affiliate of the LPF following the new affiliate organizational process prescribed in the bylaws. I will note that there is not currently a process prescribed in the bylaws. The rules report has a motion to prescribe such a process if that's adopted. However, if we adopt this and not the bylaws, then the bylaws punt to the standing rules and the AC can handle it in the standing rules. So we're good either way. Subsection A, new county affiliate is approved by a majority vote of the EC or of the delegates at the ABM, provided that it meets all the conditions of affiliation prescribed in the Constitution and bylaws. So it just codifies that approving a new affiliate is just a majority vote. It can either be done by the EC or by the full delegation. Shouldn't be controversial there. That's the practice we've always done. Once a new county affiliate is approved, the county shall be considered the official LPF county political party executive committee for all applicable purposes under state law, particularly for Florida statute 103091 and 106 and all those other good stuff. Basically, it becomes the official county party at that point, and no other petitions for a county affiliate in that county shall be considered so long as the approved county affiliate remains affiliated. This is tightening up our language to prevent a situation where you have competing affiliates in the same county. That never leads to a good place. So this is basically tightening up the language on the existing section 1. Section 2 is new. Every affiliate shall submit an annual affirmation of reaffiliation to the LPF secretary if the affiliate was at any point at the preceding calendar year. This is currently under bylaws, but because this is such a sort of foundational thing for maintaining our affiliates and is the subject of discussions, shall we say, every year, I thought it was important to have it right here in affiliation in the Constitution. So the reaffiliation must meet all requirements prescribed in the Constitution and bylaws to be considered timely and sufficient. Any affiliate that does not submit timely reaffiliation, as determined by the secretary, shall automatically be disaffiliated at the end of the next EC meeting unless some other action is taken. So this is the piece that kind of threads the needle on what happens if an affiliate fails to turn in their reaffiliation. This basically gives the executive committee a chance to act, and then if they don't act, the county is disaffiliated. I felt that the existing language proposed by, or the new language proposed by the previous Rules Committee was too aggressive in that regard. And I felt like giving them at least until the end of the next EC meeting was prudent. C, the LPF Executive Committee can grant an extension by supermajority vote for reaffiliation. Basically, in exceptional circumstances, if there's a really good reason that a county affiliate couldn't reaffiliate on time, the EC can give them an extension, a 1-month extension, basically. Subsection D, the executive committee can accept a reaffiliation that the secretary incorrectly determined to be wrong by a 2/3 vote, so long as the executive committee can demonstrate, okay, no, this is why it meets the criteria. This handles the hopefully rare case where the secretary themselves is wrong about whether an affiliate met the criteria. This provides a process for the EC to overrule them. Right now, the secretary can unilaterally determine whether an affiliate was reaffiliated or not. And while the Mr. Appler and the previous secretaries, I'm sure, would not abuse that power, I don't like anyone having unilateral approval power over something that important. So any questions on section 2, Mr. Roos?
It's interesting. This is going into my third year on the executive committee, and I've always seen people really thread the line in terms of tardiness in applying for their reaffiliation. And there's always been issues sometimes with documents. And the executive committee, it's always kind of been left in limbo if disaffiliation was, or in other words, that the disaffiliation was automatic or not, and what the executive committee could do. Since this kind of language didn't exist prior, we're all kind of scratching our heads about, oh, I guess you should just refile all your documents all over again, kind of thing.
Yeah, no, the existing language was super ambiguous, and that's what both Mr. Sellers tried to fix, and that this proposal is a different way of fixing it.
Yeah, I do want, like, for example, I believe April 1st was the deadline for this year for new the reaffiliation documents, and altogether all the way up to ABM. Look, I think the final number was either 19 or 20 counties are affiliated. So it's a healthy number for, but it's also a lot of documents, because it's each you have the officers that need to be signed in, as well as an accounting of their finances. So it can get a little bit hairy, and everybody has to, more than one person to sign these documents.
Yeah. Now, one thing that I was pleasantly surprised to see is that some affiliates recognize easier solutions to the problem and employed services like DocuSign to get their officers to sign electronically. And there's, of course, no reason the LPF can't accept that. So there are ways to streamline it. And of course, the fact that we have standardized forms for it now helps too. There a long time ago, that was also not the case. But yeah, this is intended to codify the process basically by I think the goal here of the Rules Committee was to codify it to be reasonably similar to what the EC already does anyway, but tighten it up so it's clear what the process is. I don't think that what we're proposing here is a huge difference from what's actually been done. Would you say that's fair?
Absolutely. The LPF Executive Committee has their own process to follow for this, and we have to submit our own accounting as well, and we pay an accounting firm to do it because that's the level of professionalism that we're required under Florida law, actually.
Yeah, no, for the state party, having a certified accountant do it makes a lot of sense. Obviously, for county affiliates, until you grow to a certain size, that's kind of overkill. But for the state party, that is one spending motion I was never afraid to vote for, that's for sure. Section 3 in this motion is the affiliate autonomy clause. It is identical in wording to the one in the bylaws. This was so important that I felt that it should be in the Constitution instead of the bylaws. This is what every affiliate points to when it says to the LPF EC, you can't tell me what to do. So there's, of course, being on the EC, I previously served on Director at Large, you currently do. It is a very mixed blessing from the EC's standpoint, but it is something that is important to our delegates. Section 4, disaffiliation. This is the part that was previously specified in the bylaws and was not specified well. The previous, or the recommitted motion that we were reviewing attempted to resolve this, and we kind of took similar language but tightened it up a bit. So basically, we said affiliates can be disaffiliated for violating any conditions of affiliation prescribed in the Constitution or bylaws by a 2/3 vote of the executive committee or 2/3 vote of delegates at the annual business meeting. The executive committee of the affiliate being considered for disaffiliation shall have the right to speak for up to 30 minutes on behalf of their affiliate prior to any disaffiliation vote. So this actually makes disaffiliation, I think, harder than what's currently in the bylaws, since it now is required to be for cause, and the EC of the disaffiliated affiliate now has the right to speak on their behalf. I think for something that is this important and that you would almost never actually want to do, these are important safeguards. So any questions on that one, Mr. Roos?
It seems good that we have a process in place.
Yeah, because disaffiliation is something you never want to do, but you want to have the process for those rare circumstances where it's absolutely necessary. So, and then speaking of processes, this is the part that we primarily took from Mr. Sellers' previous motion. There was no actual process for what happens on disaffiliation in the current bylaws. The EC disaffiliates and then question mark. So the process that we state upon disaffiliation, the former affiliate's chair, treasurer, and executive committee shall return all assets owned by the affiliate and all assets owned by or leased from the LPF. So basically, the LPF gets back everything it owns or everything that's owned by the affiliate itself and not its individual members. These assets shall be provided to the LPF Executive Committee within 4 weeks of final notice of disaffiliation to be held in escrow for the next future affiliate in that jurisdiction. So this part clarifies these assets are not being given to the LPF, they're being held in trust for the next affiliate. That also removes, of course, an incentive for the LPF to disaffiliate affiliates to get their assets. Not that I would hope the EC would ever do that, but when you're writing bylaws, you want to assume the most perverse things possible. Assets, we kind of spell out assets to be returned to the LPF include web content, web services, email accounts, documents, storage, social media, domain names, any other cloud services owned by the affiliate itself. And again, obviously excluding anything owned personally by any of the members of the affiliate, as well as any administrative stuff, any physical materials or equipment, data and records of the affiliate, and then the checking, savings, and monetary assets held in the affiliate's name. This is basically clarifying if you're an affiliate of the LPF, you are operating in the name of the LPF. And if you're disaffiliated, you are expected to provide your assets back to the LPF to be provided to the next affiliate. Now, the one case where this might be exempted, it's not prescribed in this motion, but I would say by convention and probably a motion in 2024 will cover this. If an affiliate voluntarily leaves the LPF, the executive committee could choose to exempt them from this requirement. That's the only case I can think of where that would be appropriate. Or in the case where if the LPF itself was dissolved for some stupid reason, then we'd want to set all of our affiliates free to get their resources out. So this is the one where if there's anything in the rules report that I think is going to be controversial, it's this section 5, because people tend to be touchy about disaffiliation. From your perspective, Mr. Roos, do you have any questions about what's being proposed here?
Controversial, but necessary, I suppose. And the only reason why it's controversial, I would think, is because there has actually been events, even two, if in my memory, while I've been on the board, that have actually required this. There's been never an explicit instructions about what to do with funds, party funds. If an affiliate voluntarily disaffiliates, or if they're, in other words, if they end up disaffiliated, what's happened in the past is, hey, we're gonna write the balance of the check. We're gonna write a check for the balance of the funds in the account to whoever we want, right? And of course, that's horrible, because what happens to all the members who donated to those funds, donated into the organization's bank account for activities of the party. And we just for instance, Hillsborough County was just reorganized, and the party had $1,500 in their name held in the escrow account. So that was the first check that going out to them. Yep. And that's a responsibility that we as the state party should manage, not some other organization, not someone's private pocketbook, and not some other, that's what's appropriate.
Yeah, and noting that any members that contributed to a county affiliate did so expecting that their contribution would be used for the Libertarian Party in that county. So I think the only, I'll be definitely taking suggestions for it next year, assuming I am reelected to my position, on putting in some safeguards for the voluntary leaving secession case, where that's the one case where maybe we can make some allowances. But other than that, I think this should cover, and I think this meets the objectives that the previous rules committee had in their version of the motion as well. It was basically just clarifying there is a legally binding expectation that a disaffiliated affiliate returns their assets, and noting that it's entirely possible that if an affiliate disaffiliates for reasons due to a disagreement with a party, they may choose to ignore this particular bylaw. And then if so, they will find out that bylaws are legally binding in government courts. And it has come up before, unfortunately. So it's unfortunate, but the party has to make sure that it's protecting its members. So speaking of Section 6, no member of any disaffiliated organization shall continue to use Libertarian Party or Libertarian Party of Florida name, brands, electronic credentials, and systems, except to communicate the organization as sees operation of LPF affiliate or to complete returning the assets to the LPF. this is basically just putting in there the sort of obvious thing of if you're no longer an LPF affiliate, you don't get to advertise yourself as one. That would be fraud, and we are against that. So any questions on that one?
Pretty straightforward on that point.
Yeah, so this is one of the two more complicated motions since it's rewriting an entire article, and it has pieces that I'm sure the members will want to debate, but I tried to lay it out as simple as possible. And if the delegates feel this is appropriate, great. If folks want to make amendments in any way, that will be in order as long as they're they're removing things from it and not adding things to it. Actually, we didn't cover special convention rules of order, did we? So
we did not, but they'll be introduced at some point on the agenda.
Yes.
Yes.
So in any case, we did not propose the special rule of order that forbids amendments until the motion is defeated. It is in order to amend motions at any time. So actually, we're running a little bit behind on time. So I guess I'll go through the remaining Constitution motions and we'll go from there. So there it should be two more constitutional motions. Let's see if I can find them. 2022 ABM CO5, Affiliate Procedures and Requirements. This was a motion proposed by the previous Rules Committee to add a requirement for county affiliates that county affiliates cannot raise or expend funds for federal campaigns except following coordination with the LPF. The reason for this, and Mr. Roos, I'm sure you're familiar with this, is that federal campaigns are under FEC regulations rather than the state division of elections, and that the state party and every county party under it are under a shared donor limit for federal elections, and expending funds for federal elections subjects the county affiliates to Federal Elections Commission's reports. In my experience, every time I've explained this to a county affiliate, they've decided wisely that they do not want that hassle and instead rely on the state party to handle federal campaigns. So this was basically the previous Rules Committee putting in a reminder in the Constitution of a county affiliate. You can support federal campaigns if you want, but you should talk to the LPF first, and you're going to find out why you don't want to. Does that make sense to you, Mr. Roos?
Absolutely. Just another layer of bureaucracy to avoid.
And I will note that this particular constitutional motion is contingent on the failure of a different bylaws motion, because we also propose the same language in a different bylaws motion that I believe solves the problem more comprehensively. However, this is in here as kind of a fail-safe of if we don't pass that bylaws motion, the simpler version that the previous Rules Committee had proposed is still going to be considered. So either way, I expect that one to be in there. The last one, 2023 ABM CO2, Executive Committee Readability Improvements. So this is for amending Article 3, which is the Executive Committee prescription in the LPF Constitution. This is the section that, quite frankly, the reconciliation turned into a train wreck. We were able to salvage something out of it that was legally defensible, but the document flow and the wording and all that from the reconciliation merges, it's not an easy read. And since this covers the election and duties of the Executive Committee, that's kind of a problem.
Yeah,
so this is our...
Let's remind everybody how we got here first. So the document, the Constitution hadn't been reconciled from changes all the way going back to 2020, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, so the Constitution was reconciled in 2021. It was the bylaws that was 2020.
Okay. So in other words, this is when you make so many changes, even if they're just grammatical, or syntax, it's best to just bring it back to the body itself, to actual party, and say, hey, just in case, we want everybody to be aware this is happening and approve this change, even if it's not substantial, at least substantial legally, because this isn't changing a form or function.
Yeah. Now for this particular motion, we do a lot of wordsmithing changes. One was just to use consistent terminology everywhere. We used a different term for chair and vice chair in like 5 different places. And then our capitalization and hyphenation of directors at large was amazingly inconsistent. So we fixed all that. We simplified the wording where we could. We did make some substantive changes in this motion, which I do spell out separately, though. The first substantive change is we struck the word deficit spending shall be prohibited. So let's just charitably say this clause has never been enforced because I think whoever passed it 20 or 30 years ago did not understand what deficit spending was. Deficit spending is really only well defined for a government agency, but it means that you're spending more than you're receiving in revenue. So Mr. Roos, I'm sure you've never been in a position where the LPF spent more money than it received in revenue, right?
Well, not on a year-to-year basis, but sometimes it would be a negative cash flow in 1 month, really, that we're spending more 1 month than we're getting. That's not unusual, especially when we have and we really do rely on reserves or having a lot more cash on hand at any given point, especially these days.
Yeah, no, so that's exactly the situation that this clause didn't account for, is since it didn't specify the term of deficit spending and it didn't specify what exactly that meant, a strict reading of it would mean we would be prohibited from ever spending cash reserves unless we had income to cover it. And that's obviously kind of silly. That's the whole point of cash reserves. So we propose striking that clause. I believe the original intent was to prohibit taking on long-term debt, but we did propose any changes related to that, since there may someday be a circumstance such as if the LPF ever wants to purchase a building. Well, we're not there yet, but if we ever reach that point, there may be cases where taking on long-term debt actually does make sense. It's usually not a good idea, but I don't think it's necessarily wise to prohibit it in the Constitution. Does that make sense to you?
It does, and there are a number of use cases for some debt, but that's for another time.
Yeah, and to my knowledge, the LPF has never taken on debt, and I don't think any executive committee members, past or present, would advocate it. But
No,
I think it's good to have
either.
I think it's good to have the option available should it ever be needed.
By the way, I would also want to point out that the executive committee has never spent down to zero, except for 1 year, and that was a problem. But that was not my time. That was 6 years ago, 7 years ago.
Yeah, I don't. Well, the one I served on, we made a pretty heroic attempt at getting close to that, but thankfully did not succeed.
Okay, then I hold my tongue. The LPF has never spent down to zero.
Yeah, there's yeah, but yeah, fond memories there. Learned some important lessons. Anyway, let's move along. Wordsmithing, we did a lot of cleanup, like I said, on hyphenation. We clarified that the elections in section 3 are the regular elections. So we defined what that term means. We moved the region representative elections to a more appropriate spot. So if you see, anytime you see italics in this, it means it was not just deleted, it was moved. We clarify that the rule about putting someone up for election if they weren't currently elected to that office means at that current business meeting. We handle more generally a rule that you can't serve in more than one position concurrently, since not every position defined in the section is an executive committee seat. We moved the section to filling vacancies to a separate section so that basically the overall document flow is now you start out with elections, then you go to filling vacancies, then you go to the duties of the executive committee, and then finally you wrap up with the meetings, so that hopefully the document flow makes a lot more sense. So we preserve the changes from the other motion on deputy treasurer. So G, no person may currently hold more than one executive committee seat, alternate seat, deputy position, or any other position described in this section. So election or appointment to any seat or position in the section shall be an automatic resignation from your current position. This is basically tightening up the rule of you can't have more than one seat at once. H also clarifies when you get seated, because that's actually something there's conflicting clauses in the Constitution and bylaws, and it's not been well handled. And it's been debated every executive committee, including this one. So the wording we propose on this is individuals elected or appointed to any position described in this section shall assume that position immediately if it is currently vacant, and at the final adjournment of the annual business meeting during which they were selected otherwise. So that's sort of a compromise between the two ways you can get elected currently. If you're filling a vacancy, you're seated immediately because it would be silly to leave the seat vacant after that. If you're not filling a vacancy and it's a regular election, then you take your seat at the end of the meeting that you're elected so that you can have continuity in the current meeting. And then you serve, of course, until the final adjournment of the next meeting, during which the position is regularly elected. So this is tightening up. I think this is more or less the actual practice that we followed, but tightening it up in the Constitution.
Sure,
So,
this is that's the flow of what's in Roberts too, and it makes sense.
So as far as vacancies, we did simplify the automatic resignation rule to just be 3 regular meetings since the most recent ABM. We tightened it up so that special meetings don't count against you for absences, because there's lots of fun ways to abuse that. And then we also removed the language on biweekly executive committee meetings, since it hasn't been done in a very long time. The Rules Committee felt that if you missed 3 regular executive committee meetings in a year, and noting that you can be excused from a meeting or you can file a proxy, there at least, and the meetings are all electronic anyway. So if you miss an executive committee meeting without getting an excuse or filing a proxy, that's a problem. So missing 3 meetings now gets you forced resigned. That's actually stricter than state law, which only requires it to be 3 consecutive meetings. So any questions on that one, Mr. Roos?
Pretty straightforward on my account.
Yep. Next up, we clarify that the chair, when there's a vacancy, that the chair's appointment is temporary until the special election to fill the position. That's in practice how we've always ran it, but the Constitution didn't actually explicitly say that. Next up, we clarify that for any seat that has a deputy or alternate, the deputy or alternate shall assume the seat automatically, and that they only hold a special election if there is no willing deputy or alternate. So this generalizes the current language on both deputies and alternates so that they all go in the same clause, and clarifies this when a special election occurs. So any questions on that one?
Nope, not really.
Yep. So, and then the clauses we struck were the ones that we handled a different way. Duties, I think the duties were all just wordsmithing. I don't think there were, we did strike the clause saying, in addition, executive committee members may present verbal reports during regular business meetings. The Constitution doesn't need to tell you you can do that. You can do that whenever you want. The written report is what's constitutionally mandated. So section 5, meetings. So funny story here in Article 3, just due to the way the different amendments collided, we said the powers and duties of the executive committee are prescribed in the Constitution, bylaws, and standing rules. Or in one case, they were said in the bylaws, in other cases in the standing rules. It was said 3 different ways in 3 different places, and none of them were right because they were all prescribed right here in the Constitution. So we struck that clause. Spelling, wordsmithing, we did incorporate the change. So in addition to the change that the previous Rules Committee made about the public and functioning website for the regular business meeting agendas, we also include here that any email votes, the full text of the motion for an email vote has to be published on the website too. So members have to be aware of that before the vote is being conducted and can contact their representatives if they care. And then similarly for special meetings, that also is required to be published on the LPF's public and functioning website. And we tightened up the language clarifying if you hold a special meeting, you can only conduct the business for which that meeting is called. Again, I think that's consistent with what Roberts prescribes as well, but this is tightening up to right now, the way that email votes are being conducted, the EC could do email votes with no non-EC member ever seeing what's being voted on, and that's not really appropriate. So that is the proposal for the executive committee cleanup. It's individually a lot of changes, but the vast majority of it is wordsmithing and document flow that I pointed out the substantive items that we did. So any questions on that one, Mr. Roos?
No, it seems pretty straightforward. I do want to mention that in our past conversations, we're looking at changes that were made over decades, right? That's how all this stuff happened and got placed in this document in the first place.
Yeah,
so
some of these, some of this wording dates back to the 1990s.
Right. I mean, the organization has been around since 1987. So I want to point out that, again, the Rules Committee here going this deep into this document to clean it up and reconcile, make sure it's a clean document we can all be really proud of and post on our website. is a good example of what they set the standard. This rules committee set the standard of what of going above and beyond.
I want to add to that I'm extremely proud of what the full team did. It was myself as chair, Omar Requero as vice chair, Matt Horvath as secretary, as the 3 elected members. And then we had substantial participation from our ex officios, Josh Lofka and Ed Appler as well. So there was a lot of work that went into reviewing this and making sure that everything, all the I's were dotted, T's were crossed, that we weren't introducing new problems, and that we properly went through and reconciled and cleaned up everything to the best we can. So I would say after these changes, if they're adopted, I would feel that the LPF Constitution is mostly in pretty good shape. There's a few changes that I would like to tackle in 2024 if reelected, regarding the candidate selection and endorsement clause. That one needs some work. One of the floor motions, actually, I think you moved a floor motion that relates to that we'll cover probably in a separate session. And then there's a few other sections in the Constitution that could probably use some cleanup, but by and large, between the work that Tony, Philippe, and Chris did previously, and then the work that this Rules Committee did, assuming it's all adopted, the Constitution should be in pretty good shape. I will say the bylaws and the standing rules could be charitably described as needing Jesus, or whatever the equivalent is for LPF governing documents, because those still have a lot of cleanup left to do. But the Constitution is obviously the highest level authority for the party, so tackling that one first made sense. So on that note, I guess a question for you, Hector, is do you want to proceed any further tonight, or do you want to wrap it up and do the bylaws and the floor motions in a different session?
All right, Greg. So we're back, and we're going to start off with we'll power through these bylaws. There are a fewer of them changes than the constitutional ones, so we should be fine at this pace we're going.
All right. So moving forward, we got 2022 ABM BO2. This was moved by the previous Rules Committee. Basically, all it does is strike a single clause that terminates all committees at the executive committee election. For context there, the executive committee appoints all of our committee members, like the communications committee, the candidates committee, and all that. In the bylaws as currently written, those committee appointments have a limited term until the ABM. However, that effectively dissolves the entire party's operational structure at the ABM, but then the executive committee doesn't meet for another month to replace people. In practice, that's a problem, right? So either you ignore the bylaws and let the existing committee keep serving anyway, or nothing gets done for a month. And I've seen both options happen. Neither one's ideal. So this motion just removes that automatically terminating the committees. The executive committee can add, remove, replace committee members at any time anyway. So having them have limited terms really is nonsensical. So we reviewed the reconciled bylaws. The bylaws reconciliation, thankfully, was much easier than the constitutional reconciliation anyway. There were much fewer conflicting changes. So we reviewed it, confirmed this still makes sense, and we agree with the change that committees, basically, if you're on an LPF committee, you serve until replaced or removed. Make sense, Hector?
It does. This bylaws change has been a long time coming. So we because we want continuity in the working committees of the party, which is basically what the party does, right? All of a sudden you're interrupted because of leadership. They're vacant, and frankly, in my experience, it takes 2 to 3 months to really get them up and going again. And we need transition if there's going to be changes in these committees.
Yeah, no, the transition and handover, when not handled gracefully, can be problematic. So anyway, that's an obvious change that, as you say, is a long time coming. And I wish that we had had the chance to do it last year, but I agree that with the delegates that it would have been a bad idea to apply it to bylaws that we didn't even see. Speaking of committee changes, 22 ABM BO4 makes a long overdue change to the affiliate support committee. It removes some special restrictions on the affiliate support committee itself. First off, it removes, the current bylaws as written prohibits the committee from having a vice chair, and I never did get a good answer as to why, but it removes that prohibition. And it also had the committee adjourning after half of the counties in Florida were affiliated. Whereas my premise for the affiliate support committee is it would actually become even more important the more affiliates we have, because that's more affiliates to support. So the previous rules committee agreed and proposed striking that language. We confirmed that that strike still made sense. The last change is they struck the duty of assisting with credentialing for the secretary, because the Constitution says the secretary can have whoever he wants assist with credentialing, so we don't need to explicitly say that. So pretty straightforward there. Any points you want to bring up on this one, Hector?
Well, I think it was always had in mind to have the affiliate support committee be a temporary committee. It was designed to say, hey, let's see what happens. And it just ended up being such a good committee. And it's been with a focus on serving affiliates. Goes without saying that clearly having its role there is important.
Yes. Now that was something that was probably my single biggest priority as Director at Large 3 was championing affiliate support. And I was the original champion to get this committee established, first as a special committee, and then the original bylaws motion to establish it. And as you say, the original language was there to treat it as an experiment. And I'm definitely glad to see that the body seems to have agreed that the experiment was a success. 2022 ABM B05. This was also from the previous rules committee. What this did was two things. First, so this both has to do with the the convention itself. It took text related to the who is officer when and moved it from the annual convention date section to the agenda section where it makes more sense. So it's just a straight move, no substantive change. And then it created a process for the LP National to create our LP National delegate slate. It gives the chair the ability to designate one executive committee member as a temporary placeholder for the LP delegation so that we can submit our placeholder delegation by the national cutoff and then amend it with our actual delegates later if for some reason our convention is delayed behind that cutoff. So this is basically giving the LPF more flexibility as to when we select our delegates within basically the framework of what the LP national rules prescribe. And if I remember what Mr. Sellers said on this particular motion, that it was patterned on what was already done in several other states and had been blessed by, I won't put words in Ms. Harlow's mouth, but I think she had reviewed this one, but I can't say that for sure. So when I first saw this one, I was like, what is this? But after I got the explanation, I thought it made sense. Any questions from your side on this one, Hector?
Well, what was the last time we had an issue regarding our actual delegation? I think it was just last year that for Reno.
Yeah, well, last year the issue was that we didn't really have a codified process for it at all. And so there was some concern that since we didn't have a written process for it, our delegates could be challenged given some of the tensions at Reno. We codified the process that we had previously always followed last year. That's the last time I remember anything substantive being raised on it, other than there were certain years where the LPF convention was held earlier than people would want just to meet the national cutoff. If you ever wondered why we had to hold it in February sometimes, that was the reason why. So adopting this motion would remove that requirement, and we would have the ability to have our convention in March or April, even in LNC years.
Right. So what happened the last year we had it in February. The problem was that we felt compelled to have it so early in the calendar when typically we've had it in April or May. And the reason why we do that is because we don't want to come, hit the convention schedule with spring break, right? Or really with the tourist season. And then we're dealing with a convention budget that is a lot higher than necessary.
Yeah, that's something the convention, anyone who's worked on the convention committee can tell you, doing a convention budget for the end of February or the beginning of March is a lot more expensive than doing it for April. So yeah.
Triple. Yeah.
And given that managing costs for conventions is challenging enough, even in April, I am very sympathetic to that problem. So this is the solution that the previous rules committee came up for it, and the current rules committee agrees with their solution. So moving on to 2023 ABM B01, the first new bylaws amendment this year, regional amendment procedure. So this adds a clause to our annual conventions of amendments to the number and composition of regions for the executive committee are adopted by a majority voted delegates at the ABM prior to the election of regional representatives. If no regional amendment is adopted, the regions for the current executive committee will continue in effect for the new executive committee. It may be hard to believe, but even though the LPF has had regional representatives for 30 years, probably, there is no process for defining the number of regions, which counties are in a region, what even a region is. I mean, there's nothing even saying it has to be counties.
Unless, in other words, there's nothing in writing anywhere
There's nothing in writing.
that defines what regions are, except a map.
Yep. And nobody even knows who drew that map when. It's just been grandfathered in from 30 years ago, basically. So this basically codifies it and makes it so that the regions may only be modified by the delegates themselves. One dirty little secret of the lack of codification of this is that the executive committee could change the regional composition at any time in any way. I am only aware of this ever being done twice, and both times for actually legitimate good reason. But you don't want the executive committee to have the unilateral ability to alter its own composition. That's a recipe for parliamentary shenanigans. This, of course, also creates the authority specifically for several of the floor motions that are built on amending either what is a region or how many they are or what counties compose a region, which we'll get to separately in the floor motion section. This particular clause was designed to be as minimal as possible to just say we have a process and then the floor motions can debate out what actual changes people want to make. In the process of drafting this motion, the Rules Committee did experiment with trying to draft regional maps, and it's exceptionally difficult to do well. So we decided that was probably not the right job for the Rules Committee, that's something that we should leave up to the delegates. So now, I will say this particular motion was not as ambitious as I know some people are hoping for, but that's how we got floor motions. Any other commentary on this one, Hector, before we move on?
I think if there might be a question if any of the floor motions do pass, what's the consideration of this particular motion in the rules report?
So this motion should be independent of any of the three motions that are under consideration. All three of, or none of the three motions abolish regional representatives. That would be the only one that would render it out of order. Now, I believe your floor motion redefines regional representatives to all be at large, but they still keep the title, correct?
Right. Yes, that's very true.
And that would still be in order even with the scope of this motion. You just would define each of the regions to consist of the entire state because there's nothing saying they can't overlap. I mean, it's a bit of an odd rules lawyering corner case, of course, but that's always the fun in bylaws, right? But yeah, I don't think this motion would conflict with any of the three motions under consideration as floor motions. Now, we'll get to some of the other implications of those floor motions in a bit, but this one should be fine. So that was that one. So 2023 ABM B02, affiliate procedures and requirements. This is the only complicated bylaws motion. This is the companion motion to the constitutional motion for affiliates. So first off, this is contingent on adoption of the constitutional motion. If we don't adopt the constitutional motion, there's no point in even considering this one because this one relies on that one for its effects. So if for whatever reason, folks either reject the constitutional motion, recommit it back to rules or anything along those lines, then this motion automatically fails due to being out of order and we move on. However, assuming we do consider it, this cleans up the existing language on affiliate autonomy and also adds some clarifications that the prohibition on LPF action in an affiliate only applies to existing affiliated counties. It only applies if you don't have written permission from the affiliate. The LPF can do anything with written permission from the affiliate, of course. And it clarifies the LPF can conduct its own business meetings and the convention without an affiliate's permission. And it can do, So those are the things we clarify there, is that the LPF can conduct its own business and it can do anything with written permission. The next piece is we strike the entire remainder of this as procedure that needs to be rewritten. So this dealt with the reaffiliation procedure. This dealt with the autonomy clause, which got moved to the Constitution. It dealt with eligibility to be a county affiliate officer. That's already prescribed in the Constitution, Article 2. It made the Rules Committee the final arbiter of disputes in the at the county level. And this is one where it's arguable, but at least my position is that the regional representatives should be who that the county affiliates appeal to first, and the Rules Committee should only be tasked for it from the Executive Committee. Because the oddity here is the Rules Committee doesn't have any actual enforcement authority. We are purely an advisory court. So assigning any sort of enforceable duty to the Rules Committee gets a little awkward. So instead, what we propose, and then we also remove the suspension section, since we propose in my opinion, better replacement in the Constitution. What we do propose is Section 2 actually prescribing policies for how you do an affiliate organizational meeting. To my knowledge, to date, this has never been written down. So Hillsborough recently did an organizational meeting, and this was kind of the basis of the guidance on how to conduct it. So basically, an organization of LPF voters seeking to become an affiliate conducts an organizational meeting with their regional rep or with the director at large if they don't have one, to adopt their initial governing documents and elect their initial executive committee. The affiliates' documents shall be subordinate to the LPF Constitution bylaws. That was an existing requirement. We moved it here. They need to be adopted by reference and shall meet all conditions of affiliation. Just as a courtesy, we note in here the LPF sample constitution and bylaws may be used to meet this requirement. There's a de facto presumption that if you use the sample blessed by the LPF, that it should meet the requirements, right? All LPF voters in the affiliate's jurisdiction shall be eligible to participate in the organizational meeting. The organizational secretary submits a petition to the LPF, which lists the executive committee names, voter IDs, and contact information, draft minutes, the governing documents, and if this is one of those odd cases where an affiliate collapsed and then was reaffiliated in the same year, the audit for the previous year is still due because of state law. Any organization petitioning to become an affiliate may conduct additional meetings to correct deficiencies. So if the secretary comes back and says your governing documents are out of order, or the executive committee does that, they can hold more meetings to fix that. In practice, this is basically codifying how we've done it, but up to now, to my knowledge, it's never been written down. The other thing is we do an explicit grant saying that if you're an organization petitioning to become an affiliate, you can use LPF name and branding with the permission of the regional representative or the EC if the regional rep is vacant, to communicate that you're using that to form a new affiliate. In practice, we've always allowed that, but this just codifies it. So the intent of all this is to codify the organizational process of new affiliates as we've always done it. Hector, does that match kind of your read of it?
Yes, and if you remember, we talked about when Hillsborough County was affiliating that they needed have an understanding about how this process worked out anyway. So we are codifying it in one place is good. And of course, we will continue to codify things until as it comes up, honestly.
Yep. And then next codification, section 3, is reaffiliation annually, as prescribed in the Constitution, no later than March 31st of each year if they were affiliated at any point during the prior calendar year. So this does put the March 31st date in the bylaws. I don't remember if it was in there previously or not, to be honest. I don't think it was. And says it needs to include the names, voter IDs, and contact information for your entire executive committee, the minutes of your most recent ABM, your audit, of course, the current governing documents, and those can be included by reference. If you publish them on the website, that's obviously meets the requirement. And any approved amendments that were not otherwise communicated to the LPF. So if you've amended your governing documents and not otherwise made that available to LPF, this is the time you do that. So this is a bit of a change from I think, how it's currently done, but this is more to harden it to the types of information that the LPF EC actually should care about. Who's on the executive committee? How do I reach them? How do we validate that they're LPF voters and members? The minutes of the ABM to show that was conducted in order. There have been issues that have come up in the past where there were disputes over how an ABM was conducted, and even getting the minutes of the ABM were unnecessarily complicated. That is not acceptable. And then the ability to get the current governing documents on request. If you ask an affiliate what their current governing documents is and they can't tell you, that's a problem. So all of this makes sense from your perspective, Hector? So there are some requirements this removes. I think we removed the signature requirement as being kind of unnecessary. And I think everything else is still the same.
Right. I mean, there'll always be things that will have to be codified in the future. For example, having the EIN numbers for, you know, those kind of things. But for the most part, this is complete, and we'll revisit those kind of other kind of questions in future iterations of this document.
Yeah, no, I'm sure people will identify things we've missed, and then this can be handled in 24. Because this is more a policy and procedures kind of deal. It's not a matter of fundamental principles or rights. And of course, noting that the affiliate can request the EC give them an extension if they have an actual reason why they can't complete the reaffiliation on time. Like, for example, if their chair passed away 2 days before the due date, then obviously it would be unreasonable. If they hadn't already completed it, it would be unreasonable to expect them to complete that time. So the EC does have the discretion to grant extensions where it's appropriate. Conditions of affiliation. This is the one where this is the only part I could see that might possibly be controversial. Basically, the way I would phrase this is these are what the LPF expects as the affiliates in return for the rights to be an LPF affiliate. And therefore, these are also the things an affiliate can be disaffiliated over. So affiliates shall prescribe in their governing documents a process to conduct an annual business meeting to, at minimum, conduct regular executive committee elections as prescribed in the affiliate's governing documents, and to consider amendments to the affiliate governing documents. This is also state law. This is not just an LPF requirement, but it makes sense even if it wasn't state law. Affiliates shall guarantee all members residing in the affiliate's jurisdiction the right to participate in affiliate business as prescribed in the LPF Constitution Article 2, Member Bill of Rights. Straightforward. Affiliates shall maintain a public functioning website and shall publish their current governing documents and public notice of all business meetings to this public and functioning website. The business meetings requirement is state law. The current governing documents is just good policy. Subsection D, affiliates can prescribe additional member rights processes, elected or appointed positions, or any other policies beyond the minimum required by the LPF Constitution, provided that no member or registered voter of any other political party may vote, be nominated for any elected or appointed position, or otherwise have authority to make decisions regarding the affiliate's business. So this is basically clarifying an affiliate can provide any sort of rights or positions beyond what the LPF requires as a minimum, other than you can't put a member of another party in a decision-making position. That's obviously a conflict of interest. Related to other parties, no affiliate shall endorse, contribute money, or in-kind donations to or otherwise actively support the election of any candidate who is a member or registered voter of any other political party, or who is not a registered LPF voter and opposing a registered LPF voter. So this is basically to kind of remind affiliates that if you're an LPF affiliate, that means you shouldn't be promoting members of other parties, and particularly not against LPF candidates. Now, this is a prohibition only on the affiliate as an institution. Individual members of the affiliate, including officers, are still free to do whatever their conscience dictates. The other piece, and this is actually, we weakened the language a little bit from the previous Rules Committee submission. The previous Rules Committee also prohibited supporting NPA candidates. However, we felt that as long as an NPA candidate was not opposing a Libertarian candidate, there was no compelling interest to the LPF to prohibit that. Similarly, no affiliate shall endorse, contribute money, blah, 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 to any partisan club, partisan political committee, or political party executive committee of any political party other than the LPF. So affiliates can't donate their funds to their Republican executive committee counterparts. No shenanigans like that, please. Believe it or not, that was not previously against the rules. Then finally, due to shared regulatory requirements affecting the LPF and all of its affiliates, an affiliate may only raise or expend funds for federal campaigns after coordination with the LPF for each other's campaign. So that's this is the bylaws equivalent to the constitutional motion reviewed earlier. So basically, these are the things that we expect of affiliates if this motion is adopted. And therefore, these are the things that if you break them, you can be disaffiliated over. Is there any of these you want to go into more detail, Hector?
No, it's pretty self-explanatory. The conditions for these conditions are self-explanatory. I don't think this is controversial at all. And I think just going over and showing it to people who are going to be watching this is the important part. And I hope this is useful.
Yeah. And I will note that even with these restrictions in place, the LPF grants a truly amazing amount of latitude to its county affiliates compared to our Republican and Democratic counterparts. That we do allow for a lot of affiliate autonomy. And the biggest piece of that is we do not require personal loyalty oaths of our affiliate officers. That affiliate officers are free to do individually whatever they want. Now, affiliate officer campaigning for a member of another party is frowned upon, but it's not against the Constitution or bylaws. That we don't need the structure of the party to encourage good ideas. Is at least the way that I like to present it. And this is something that I found is very appealing to folks who do have experience in the other parties where they are very heavy-handed top-down. I think that's it from the bylaws motions. Yeah, that was the last one. So that's all we have for the rules report. It's a lot, as you said, because there's 2 years stacked up, but it's at the same point, it's not really a lot since individually, most of them are pretty straightforward. So you want to go on to the floor motions real quick? See if we can wrap those up before 8.
Let's go to the special rules real quick, actually.
Yeah. So the special rules, see if I can.
Right. You typically what happens if people don't understand what's in the rules report, they don't want to participate, or they'll maybe send it back to rules, and that would be we want to get this business done and out of the way. So let's talk about special rules of order. These are introduced at the beginning of the agenda.
Yes. So the two things come into play here. The bylaws say that the convention follows Robert's rules of order, except as otherwise prescribed in the bylaws and the standing rules. And then the standing rules give the rules committee the authority to recommend initial special rules of order to the convention to supplement Roberts. Historically, the rules committee has done this, and we used as an input what the previous rules committee did. However, by and large, we believe that following Roberts as written makes the most sense. So the only special rules that this rules committee is proposing this year has to do with the mechanics of debate. We mostly took the language from the previous rules committee on this. So the first one is the special rules are adopted at the very beginning with the agenda. Basically, they are automatically adopted unless the delegation objects. But if the delegation objects, the delegation can approve whatever they want, or just say, we're not going to use this at all. We're just going to follow Roberts.
And these rules are typical. They're not really changed from year to year. I don't think there's anything here that's.
No, we kept everything. We reworded it a little bit, but the substance is the same as the previous years. So the first one is you can only call the question if someone for and against has debated. So you can't use call the question to prevent the opposing side from debating at least once. Debates should be alternate for and against. This is just good parliamentary practice. If both are present. I mean, obviously, if you only have people for, or if you only have people against, then you don't need to alternate. But at that point, you also should wonder, is debate even needed? If we have multiple working microphones, we'll have one for people in favor of the motion and one for people against the motion, just to make it clear who's on which side and to do the alternation. However, if we only have one working microphone, which thanks to Murphy's Law does happen sometimes, then you alternate at the same microphone. The original mover or their designated substitute shall have the opportunity to speak first on any motion in favor of the motion. Again, this is custom, but it's good practice. And then debate shall be limited to 3 minutes per speaker per instance, up to 2 instances per motion. So you can speak for 3 minutes and you can speak up to 2 times. So 3 minutes each time. Now, noting for any particular motion, the delegates can always choose to change debate rules. The delegates always have that right. This is just the default if the delegates don't say otherwise. The other thing we noted is the quorum rules. These come from Roberts and we cannot overrule them. So previous year's special rules tried to set quorum, but as it turns out, it's neither necessary nor in order because quorum is in fact fixed by Roberts. The good news is the way that the previous rules committees tried to set quorum is exactly what Roberts dictates anyway, which is the number of people who signed in. So any questions on the special rules?
Looks pretty straightforward. Yep.
Yep. We definitely went through and asked, like, is there anything that Roberts doesn't cover that's actually important? Because Roberts covers just about everything. But the actual mechanics of the debate were the only thing we came up with, since that's going to be specific to the room and the setting. All right. So let's see if I can pull up floor motion. So actually, let's go back to the agenda and make sure there's not any other specialness.
Oh, wait, normally some of these rules wouldn't be necessary if you were working, if the chair was keeping an eye on the debate. But sometimes, especially when there's a lot of motions and a lot of business happening, that just falls to the wayside.
Yeah, and this is as much a reminder to the chair as anyone else, since when you have a room full of 60 or 90 or 100 cantankerous libertarians, it can be a little overwhelming. All right.
Whose sobriety is in question.
Yes, always. So, yeah, this may be the first year where I'll have to refrain from my preferred intoxicants during the meeting. Just doing that as rules chair is not generally advised. All right, so moving forward, we went through the rules reports of the Constitution and bylaws, items 12 and 13. We don't have any motions for standing rules. Those can be handled by the executive committee anyway. Recess for lunch. Doing that all before lunch is, in my opinion, a little ambitious, but we'll give it our best shot. Credentials report after lunch, quorum call after lunch, final call for nominations, election of officers. I don't believe any of the officer elections are affected by floor motions or rules report motions. However, the director at large election is affected by one floor motion if it happens. So we'll get into that in the floor motions, but basically there's two ways it could happen. There's the floor motion in question abolishes the position of director at large. If the election of directors at large happens first and that floor motion's passed, the two directors at large immediately get unelected because their positions no longer exist. On the other hand, if the floor motion is passed first, then the election just doesn't happen because it would be out of order because the positions wouldn't exist. So either way, there's a way forward. I would feel kind of bad for the director at large being elected, then being immediately told, okay, but your position doesn't exist. But if that's what happens, that's what happens.
And hence why this agenda may be amended at the point of approval on that line item in order to to accommodate that issue.
Yep. Now, the other thing I'll note, 20, executive committee meeting to certify the officer slate. This is to kind of tie some loose ends up with state law of having the executive committee certify the officers that the delegates elected so that we're covered under both political law and corporate law and everything was done properly. Because the LPF is a corporation as well. So the executive committee is bound by our bylaws to honor the delegates' vote, so they can't pull shenanigans like say, well, actually, we're going to name someone else chair. No, that's not allowed. But this is just a formality. It is just the 4 officers, however, so regardless of how things play out with the director of large, that doesn't affect that. Item 21, Rules Committee nominations. Rules Committee is elected. There are 3 elected positions. The person who gets the highest number of votes becomes the chair. I will be running. We'll see if the delegates like the work that I did, then I may get reelected as chair. If not, they may give me my freedom. As far as I'm concerned, either way I win. Straightforward, nothing crazy there. Typically, we did it as a ranked choice vote or an approval vote, I forget which, and then just the top 3 get it. 23, regional caucuses. This is one where the floor motions could introduce some fun, and we may or may not get to it before the end of the day. So the regional caucuses is the breakout where each region has its own separate election of its regional representatives and alternates through whatever process they deem fit. Typically, it's just done by majority approval vote, though. So I think to really get into the details of how that could get interesting, we should probably go straight to the floor motions though. End of day announcements, recess. Day 2, call to order, credentials, quorum, committee reports. Each of the existing standing committees presents its report. Platform reports, there is none. New business, floor motions, constitution. This is where things could get kind of exciting. So let's see if I can pull them up real quick. So motions from the floor. So first one, motion to add an article of secession to the LPF Constitution. This is filed by Vice Chair Hlavka. So he's moving a clause, Article 10, affiliate secession, that prescribes a procedure for the LPF.
Yeah, before you dig a little bit more into that one, he has expressed that he is actually going to pull this one back, and he's going to file basically an amended version of this after talking with the convention parliamentarian.
Yes.
So that copy, if we want, you can skip to the next one, and I'll send you a copy of the link to that text.
I actually read it before the meeting, so I can speak to it.
Okay.
So yeah, the amendment simplifies this one and removes some of the parts that I personally had an objection to. So the short version is as the amended version that he's proposing, and the amendment is in scope, it doesn't violate the public notice requirement, so that's good. The amended version would say at every annual business meeting, the final 2 items of business may be, so instead of shall require to be present, someone may choose to move a motion to secede from the national party. Such a motion, in this case, it's framed in the opposite. It's a motion to reaffirm our commitment to the national party. So as a motion to affirm our commitment, it only requires a 10% to pass, meaning you would need 90% of the delegation to vote to secede. And if we were ever in a position where 90% of the delegation was willing to secede from the national party, there's probably actually a good reason for it. There's also a similar vote on whether we continue to be part of our national party's region. Currently, there's no codified process for that, so this would add such a process. So the amendment strikes section 2, which authorized the executive committee to initiate this process. I do not think the executive committee should have the ability to do this process, and the proposed amendment strikes that. So this basically codifies a process for the LPF to secede from the LNC as a whole or from our current LNC region, but requiring an overwhelming supermajority vote only at the annual business meeting. Part of the intent behind this too, as I understand it, is to ensure that we close off any potential for a rogue executive committee doing this unilaterally without authorization, that it's solely the province of the delegates. And there have unfortunately been other state parties where things like that have happened, and we want to make sure that if the LPF ever chooses to leave the national party, it is the overwhelming consensus of the delegates and not the action of a rogue few. Does that match your understanding, Hector?
Yeah, absolutely. That's that.
So as amended, I don't think I would have any problem with the motion, although I also don't think it's strictly necessary because our Constitution specifies that we're affiliated with the LNC, and that's a 75% vote with 30-day notice to remove that part. But I see no reason to object to the motion with the amendment. So that one will be up to the delegates of whether they want this process or not. All right, so that was the first one. Second one, motion to reduce number and make regional representatives elected at large. Mover is yourself. Well, it's your motion. Would you like to explain it?
Sure. I mean, the there's an intent here to, by the way, there are 3 motions technically that are from the floor made to modify these positions. Mine is, I feel, is the moderate position in it. In that, however, I do call for a reduction in the number of regional reps. Why? Because we have 21 board members in total. Right now, we have 2 vacancies and a number of people who who will not be coming back to the board, because they don't feel that they have the time to commit. And that's something that happens all the time. That we have a lot of positions on the board, but they're either remain vacant or they're not populated with people who actually have time to truly serve on the board. With that said, in other words, we have 4 officers, 3 at-large directors at large, and then 14 regional reps. So that's a lot of regional reps. Itself is, in other words, can outnumber the rest of the board that's actually elected at large. So that structurally is an issue. But functionally, Robert's rules, does say that we should have it as we should always be talking about the structure and the size of our committee in order to basically have it as operational as possible without any particular hangups that we can run into. Now, on that note, this language doesn't essentially says that we should reduce the number of these of the regional reps, but also make them all, instead of voted by region and a region caucus, simply elect them at large. So you have all of these regional reps elected by the entire body, and frankly, the body's done a very good job of electing people at large. I mean, including myself, of course. Greg here, who's also elected at large as the rules chair, and the others as well, whether it's the officers or the other directors at large. And it's just proven that it's a better, having the entire board, the entire delegation, a convention delegation, vote has had a better outcome than these small caucuses. Some of them as small as 2 people, maybe even 1 person just showing up, getting on the board like that. Or if they're not filled here, they're filled by an appointment by the executive committee. That's if there is any takers, and we haven't even been able to give the positions away for the last 4 months or 5 months now.
And I will note, when I served, there was a point where a majority of the EC was appointed by the chair, and people had understandable concerns about that.
Right, and there is that concern about that. To a certain extent, to use the words of another member of the board about this question of affiliate was welfare, that when you have the very busy and active affiliates across the state having to give the same representation to areas that have no activity whatsoever, that's not an equitable situation, and that's essentially giving a form of welfarism of the activity of the affiliates that are doing a lot of good work to areas that may not even have affiliates, in all honesty, because honestly, people generally just chose not to affiliate, or there were too few enough people interested in doing so in the first place. Yep. And that's what happens. So generally, there's a lot of value issues in regards to the position, and historically, we've seen a lot of this position, the role of regional reps play itself out, and we can just simply do better. And we have been doing better with at-large elections. So this is a good trial on that note. The only other thing here is besides that, just reducing it to a smaller number. So instead of 14, it reduces to 8 regional representatives elected at the annual business meeting. So that cuts it down from 14. So it takes down from 6. So now we're down to from 21 minus 6 is 15.
Yes, and noting that Roberts generally advises that an effective board is usually between 7 and 15 members. That any more than that tends to be inefficient, and any less than that tends to be abusive. So yeah, I think kind of sharing some of my own thoughts on this one. Now, I will say first off, Rules Committee did not take any official positions on the floor motions. They were mostly moved out when we were in the final stages of our own rules report. And this is something where we'll just let the delegates sort out what they want. For this motion and the other 2 motions restructuring the executive committee, I want to say first off, it's a purely pragmatic debate of what did the delegates of the party want to see their governing structure look like. This is not a matter of fundamental libertarian principles. This is not one of those you're not a real libertarian if you don't support this or that kind of deal. It's a matter of what is the most effective structure that achieves our goals as a party. I will say you make a pretty good case for why it should be all at large. I'm sort of ambivalent on it myself. The debate between at large versus district-based representation in parliamentary settings goes back thousands of years. I doubt we're going to settle it tonight. But structurally speaking, this motion would cleanly apply with the other changes to Article 3. The main question would be how such the elections would be conducted, since you would have 8 seats elected at large. I'm assuming that you have something in mind like ranked choice or approval voting for a single election instead of having 8 separate seats being competed for. Is that your thought?
Yeah, I think it's we can decide right then and there on as a body about the form of voting, and I think approval voting and the way the rules committee is selected works pretty well, considering that we basically have the membership being, I'm sorry, the election of the rules committee members is by approval voting, but they're selected by rank, right? So you have 3 positions that are selected. The top 3 get in basically, and similarly here, the top 8 would get in, right? But at that point, the question is, if someone should not get on the committee as a regional representative, then everyone knows to not vote for that person, and you don't have that option in the current caucus system.
Structurally, how it works, and as you say, the delegates can set voting procedure however they want in any case. Aside from the voting procedure question, how it works would be pretty straightforward. I won't say that I have a strong opinion on this particular motion, either for or against. I'm going to think about it some more. But if the delegates choose to go with this structure, that is their prerogative, and I'm sure the party could make it work. Yeah. So that's that floor motion. Next up, motion to amend Article 9, endorsement of candidates. I can go about 15 minutes more. I thought I had a hard stop at 8, but I think I can stretch it to 8:15.
All right.
I want to power through the floor motions if we can. So endorsement of candidates. This was also your motion.
Yes.
But if I may take the prerogative, I'm going to say why I think you did it. And it's because the current requirements for the LPF to endorse a candidate includes a statement that they have to be registered with the Florida Division of Elections. The problem is that only legislative and statewide candidates are registered with the Florida Division of Elections. Federal candidates are registered with the Federal Elections Commission, and county candidates are registered with each county supervisor of elections, and municipal candidates are registered with the city clerk. So a strict reading of this would prohibit the LPF from endorsing anyone who's not a legislative or statewide candidate. That's a little silly. Is that your intent?
Absolutely. So what we have here is we have a lot of partisan candidates at countywide and even in single member district county races. So the constitutional officers are all moving toward partisan offices in the state. So otherwise, based on the current language, the LPF would be prohibited from openly endorsing them. And even though we kind of sent money to Duval County LP to help their candidates over there recently.
Yeah, and noting that it's an endorsement and a contribution are not the same thing. So yeah, and I also will note that that particular Article 9 has some other issues with it that I would like to tackle in 2024, but this removes an obvious barrier with no real downside. So I would be in favor of this motion myself. So next up, motion to amend the regional alignment of the LPF. This is moved by Vice Chair Pavka. This is basically preserving the current regional representative structure. So it's one of the 3 motions on the EC structure. This is preserving the current structure that has 3 at-large directors and a number of district-based regional reps. It, however, does reduce the number of regions from 14 to 8, like your proposal. But instead of making them at large, it proposes a selection of 4 different maps that the delegation can pick between for the regions. And of course, this would be in order with the bylaws motion in the rules report if that passes. And this also raised some interesting questions of, if you're doing district-based regional representatives, who are the regional representatives representing? Are they representing the county affiliates? Are they representing LPF members? Or are they representing LPF voters? Or are they representing the state population as a whole? Because each of those answers gives you a different layout. So as you alluded to, that some regions have 0 or 1 county affiliates, but they still have a number of registered Libertarian voters. And so which thing you decide the representation is for is going to dictate which map you think is fair.
Well, don't forget, this also preserves the caucus selection process.
Yes.
The regional caucus selection process.
So of the three options, this is the one that preserves the status quo other than reducing the number of regions, but they otherwise work the same, and they are composed of different counties. So option one is the even split model, which is basically as close to the current 14 region model with 8 regions. I'm going to note, no matter what map you pick in an 8 region model, the Panhandle regional rep is going to have a bad time. The Panhandle is so much less densely populated. Geographically aligned model, this gives all of North Florida to region 1, and otherwise does a split here. Area balanced gives equal areas to kind of give equal drives to each region rep. Although I'm going to say that doesn't look very equal area for region 1 to me. And then population balance model is each region covers an equal population. Again, these are all pragmatic choices. The delegation can pick any one of these 4 maps they want if we go with this option, or none of them to say we're not going to pick this option. I would personally say the first map makes the most sense to me, but I don't have a strong opinion of it. I'm probably not going to speak on this motion at all. All right. This is one where it's up to the delegates of what do you want your EC to look like, and we'll make it work for you. All right, next up, motion to delete directors at large. This is from Deputy Secretary Crosby. This is the third approach to shrinking the executive committee and realigning it, and it goes the opposite direction of deleting the director at large position in its entirety. And that's really all it does. So you end up with the 14 regional representatives and the 4 officers, right? He doesn't change the region reps, I don't think.
Not in this motion. He has a separate motion for that.
Yeah. So this is a motion that just eliminates the director at large positions in their entirety. I am vehemently against this motion. The director at large is, now, both of us are biased having served in this position, but I found the director at large position brings a lot of value to the party. I definitely agree that we need to slim the EC down, but I don't think this is the position to eliminate.
Let's just recap this real quick. So director at large positions are 2-year positions. Typically, because they're voted at large, they're basically people who are trusted by the entire body. They usually have the most experience and bring the most professionalism to the board, and so they're basically the strongest after the officers. Frankly, they're the strongest members of the executive committee.
Yeah. And I will also note that they have primary fiduciary duty with regards to being corporate directors as well. Every EC member has a fiduciary duty, but the directors at large have the highest such duty, which basically means if anyone's making decisions that are contrary to the party's best interests, the directors are the ones that are going to be personally liable first. And I think that makes sense, as you would expect for corporate directors as well. So I understand the thought process behind it. I just don't agree with it.
So the Constitution of the LPF Constitution currently says that, for example, if all the officers resign, the one next up is the at-large, the directors at large in order from 1, 2, 3 to fill those spots, not the region reps.
So so going back to the interaction of floor motions and agenda order, as we mentioned, if the one to delete the directors at large passes, that unelects the directors at large if those elections already occurred, and it makes those elections out of order if not. For your motion and for Mr. Hlavka's motion, those are not dependent on the director at large election, but they are dependent on the regional caucuses. And in both cases, it would be somewhat of a matter of interpretation from the body and the parliamentarian as to what happens. So, well, let's first off, if the agenda is amended so these floor motions are passed before the regional caucuses, obviously no problem. We just do whatever the amended version says, right? If these motions are adopted after the regional caucuses have been conducted, there's a bit of a sticky wicket. There's a couple different ways this could be done, and I think it would be a matter of interpretation from the delegates and the parliamentarian on what the body wants and what is in order. Basically, there are two ways. There are two ways that it could be played. The first is that you can say these regional caucuses were now null and void because the positions that as they were elected to no longer exist, and then you hold the new elections. That's probably the more straightforward way of doing it, but it means we have to do some elections twice, right? That's not great for the schedule. The other is to say, well, these elections already happened and they can't be undone, so therefore these amendments don't take effect until 2024. And I would be very curious in the parliamentarian's interpretation as to which one of those is the correct outcome, because that's a complicated enough case that I'm not going to spitball it off the cuff.
Well, I'm going to take the irresponsible position and say that given some history I've seen, that changes to governing documents are effective immediately.
Yeah, no, the changes are effective
unless otherwise.
Yeah, no, the changes are effective immediately. The question is, does that undo the previous election that occurred prior to it? And how does that work out? So I plan to look into that a little bit more. I'm sure the parliamentarian will have an opinion on that. That's just something we need to be prepared to handle if it happens. Now, I will say bluntly speaking that I would not be surprised if the delegates just refer all three motions to rules, because that seems to be the go-to when the delegates have motions they don't want to deal with. But I could be surprised. You never know, right? Okay, 1 second. Can you pause for a second?
Sure.
All right, motion to clarify active membership. This is from Deputy Secretary Crosby. And what this does is to add a requirement to be an LPF member that not only do you have to assign the NAP and file it through the website, you have to do it every year. So you have to renew your membership each year rather than it being one and done. So my understanding of this motive of this motion is we have no clue who our active members are currently. We have, between the fragmentation of the records and people could have signed the NAP pledge at any point in the past however many years, there's no real distinction between active members and anyone else. That said, I vehemently disagree with this motion being in the Constitution. It's hard enough to get people to sign the NAP pledge once on the website. I don't want to sign it every year. I don't want to make anyone else do that. So my suggestion for the way to accomplish what Mr. Crosby wanted on this was to instead have the membership committee send out an annual email asking people if they'd like to remain active members, and have them click on a link in an email and just have it be a soft sort of, they get marked as active if they click it. But nobody's membership gets terminated. I don't think that it's appropriate to terminate membership just because you didn't renew on a website every year. So this is one I definitely have strong feelings on. What are your thoughts on that, Hector?
I think it's pointing out a problem that we have, that we don't know who our active members are. Absolutely, that's true. I think going about it this way is cumbersome, to say the least. I think there are other opportunities to do something about this. Or maybe reconsider what we really mean in terms of what an active member actually means. Because if they're not volunteering and they're not donating and they're not engaged in the process, are they active at all anyway, right?
So, and there may be ways, as we improve our records and CRM systems, there may be ways to automate that without requiring this particular method.
Sure, absolutely.
But I did advise Mr. Crosby that he can get 99% of the effect of this just by passing a standing rule asking the membership committee to do this on a purely advisory basis. And then he gets to know who the active members are without it being a constitutional thing. So, and I expect that'll be the fallback position if this doesn't pass. So next up, motion to reduce responsibilities of regional representatives, also from Deputy Secretary Crosby. This basically removes the responsibility for forming new affiliates from the regional reps. I agree with it in concept, but the problem I have with this motion is it doesn't give the responsibility to anyone else. It is my opinion that this should be the responsibility of the affiliate support committee, and I would be able to support this motion if it made that change. Now, in your case, if you make all the regional representatives at large, it has essentially the similar effect because they're no longer responsible for particular districts, right? But yeah, this is one where I agree with the intent of it, but I don't think this is the exact right change to achieve this. So I would say this one is probably one that should be referred to rules and hammer out for 2024. I think this one would still apply regardless of whether your motion, Mr. Hovka's motion, or Mr. Crosby's motion are passed.
Sure. I agree. I agree on that. I also want to point out that there is no designated role for directors at large either. So this would kind of match what exists in that language, even though Mr. Crosby wants to get rid of that directors at large too.
Yeah. Now, at that point, the only responsibility of a regional rep would be representing the counties in their region, which, to be fair, should be their primary responsibility if they exist. But that's one where we'll see how the debate shakes out, but I think that it's missing the piece that would be needed for me to support it. Last up, almost done, motion from Deputy Treasurer Leisner to remove the unilateral power of the standing committee chair nominations from the LPF chair and give the entire executive committee the ability to nominate candidates. So what this does is amends the bylaws to basically, right now, the process for a committee is that the chair nominates the committee chair and the members, and then the executive committee either approves or disapproves of the chair nomination. Mr. Leisner's proposed alternative is to instead have nominations be coming from anyone on the executive committee, and then you have open elections. So anyone could nominate a committee chair, and then if multiple people are nominated, it's a competitive election. I will note that both options are prescribed in Ronner for committees. I believe the current rules are option 4, and Mr. Leisner's proposal is option 2. So both are specifically allowed by Ronner. It's just a matter of who people feel should be nominating committee chairs. I know in the past, one of the concerns is that the LPF chair would somewhat stack the standing committees with either their loyal yes men or choices other people disagreed with, and then would refuse to nominate anyone that other members on the EC wanted them to nominate. On the other hand, part of the duties of the chair is this exact thing, so people elect the chair expecting this to be the case. So it's a matter of who the delegates think should be empowered to make these nominations. As someone who served on the EC more recently from me, what's your take on this one?
I think it's an interesting solution. Generally, if the language was just struck generally speaking, by the way, we would be left with the solution in Roberts explicitly, which is the committee members themselves in these working committees would appoint their leadership roles. Their chair, vice chair, and secretary.
Yes, and that already is the case for vice chair and secretary. The chair is the only one with the special provision.
That's right. That's right. That was my only thought. I do appreciate the interest to tackle this problem, which has been, if the chair is only one person, so there's not a lot of feedback you get unless you're going to take the political intrigue or interest of voting something down that the chair wants to move. It's impolitic, in other words. So
yeah, I would say my experience on the EC was that there was a substantial deference to the chair's nominees up until the point where there wasn't. But at first, people tend to defer to the chair and only vote against the chair's nominees with a really good reason.
And I just want to point out that if it's approved this way, that anybody on the executive committee can nominate, it would lend to a greater degree of cordiality, because people would actually have to confer and come to an agreement, right, on various choices.
And in theory, it would mean that there are more candidates to consider, and therefore whoever is appointed reflects a wider consensus.
Right. The same
So,
thing kind of my argument regarding that, turning regional reps into being voted at large, because you have just a greater consensus of approval. And that's.
So I am notionally mildly in favor of this. I don't really have a strong opinion on it. And I also, as you said, I've also considered the solution of just letting the committees themselves decide their chair. The only time where the committee chair is actually a matter of concern to the EC is when the chair has some kind of special power above and beyond just presiding over the committee. And I don't think, maybe the communications chair, due to their power over outward facing messaging, might be the only example I can think of. And the rules chair, of course, but the rules chair is already elected at large anyway.
Isn't that a great example of what I'm talking about?
So now there have been proposals in the past to make all committees elected at the ABM, and I'm not so enthusiastic about that idea.
Yeah. Well, the reason why we elect the rules chair at large, in fact, that way is, and really the other members of the rules committee, is because they're expected to be independent of the executive committee. And in some cases, in limited cases, hold the executive committee accountable.
Yep, no, that is entirely the intent, and rules is the only committee with that particular mission explicitly. Now, audit has it to an extent as well, but that's a bit of a different circumstance. But audit is still appointed by the EC, just with substantial ex officios prescribed. But in the case of rules, yes, it's explicitly intended to be a check on the EC, at least from an advisory standpoint. And I've generally found that the rules committee has historically been perceived as being fair and impartial enough that its opinions are given substantial weight by both the EC and the delegates. So that is, hopefully people feel that way about the current rules committee as well, but certainly I would say that of previous ones. But yeah, for this motion, I could be persuaded to vote in favor of it. I'm not sure it's necessarily going to change a whole lot, but I do think democratizing this process within the EC would potentially allow for better and more consensus choices to emerge, short of the committee itself deciding its own chair, which is obviously not on the agenda, so that's not something we could vote on this year anyway. So that concludes the floor motions. So yeah, the main complexity with the floor motions, now A is reconciling them with Article 3 changes, but I believe that none of them conflict with the rules report Article 3 changes in any way that can't be cleanly reconciled. So that's a good first step. The second is order of elections versus order of those motions will introduce some complexities. If we do the motions after the positions for which they would affect, as I said, I would suggest to the movers to consider amending their motion to be effective in 2024 to avoid the headache of having to redo the election. However, ultimately, that's up to the mover and the body. Now, if they go beforehand, then of course, no problem. We do it, however, is actually on the books when the elections happen. So that'll be a debate that I'm sure will be held at the adoption of the agenda. Hopefully it's a debate we can settle quickly and not be one of those things like in the LNC where we debate on adopting the agenda for hours, but as libertarians, you never know. I am not aware of any floor motions for the standing rules. However, fun fact on that, those don't require advance notice, so those can be done at the convention. However, it is highly unusual for delegates to move to amend the standing rules. Typically, it's only if it's something like profoundly important that the rules committee and the EC missed, since the rules committee and the EC can change the standing rules at any time anyway.
I remember last year I moved a motion for a resolution of the, and there was no space for it, so we just had to slap it on the standing rules section anyway.
Yeah. So now we have an explicit spot for that. That's number 34, remaining new business. So if anyone has resolutions or other motions that don't fall in any of these special categories, that would go in item number 34, remaining new business. And again, those don't require public notices either. They can either be done at the adoption of the agenda, or if you want to annoy people, you can move to suspend the rules to add them. 35, request volunteers for committees. We need them. It's always a good thing to ask for. 36, final announcements. 37, Stephen's concluding remarks before he's set free, and then adjournment. So that's the full agenda. we did get through discussing it in roughly what? So we started at 6, 2.5 hours. Oh, wow. So there's a lot
yeah,
going on.
yeah.
But hopefully, I think every individual item is very straightforward, and it's just up
Right.
to the delegates to decide, is this something we want or not? Is this the way we want our party to run?
Oh, that's
And
why I wanted to. I'm glad we did this because you know, it gives a good overview of what is expected in terms of the business, this intricate, really nitty gritty, you know, paperwork, really, in some cases, and really, but on the other bigger scheme of things, how do we want this party to be structured moving forward? So, you know, tell Mario I say hi.
Yep. So, yep, that is my call clock. So, yeah, we got through everything. And as I said, I don't think any of the items on our agenda are a matter of like fundamental libertarian principles. It's just a matter of how do we most effectively structure our party to do the job we want it to do. And that's a good place to be.
All right.
So with that, I will thank you for your time and for putting this together. Hopefully people watch this and come to their own conclusions on what they think we should move forward with, and then we can hopefully do business very smoothly at the actual convention.
Absolutely. And I hope you're a speedy return to the Rules Committee as well.
I appreciate it.
Very good. Thank you so much again.